Welcome to the Real English Practice YouTube channel.
What is your name?
My name is Lisa.
When do you wake up?
I wake up at 7 a.m.
Why do you wake up early?
I wake up early to exercise.
Where do you exercise?
I exercise at the gym.
Which exercise do you like?
I like running.
What do you eat for breakfast?
I eat eggs and toast.
When do you eat breakfast?
I eat breakfast at 8 a.m.
Why do you eat eggs?
I eat eggs because they are healthy.
Where do you buy your eggs?
I buy my eggs at the supermarket.
Which supermarket do you go to?
I go to Green Market.
What do you drink in the morning?
I drink coffee.
When do you drink coffee?
I drink coffee after breakfast.
Why do you like coffee?
I like coffee because it gives me energy.
Where do you make your coffee?
I make my coffee in the kitchen.
Which cup do you use?
I use a blue cup.
What do you wear to work?
I wear a dress to work.
When do you leave for work?
I leave for work at 9 a.m.
Why do you wear a dress?
I wear a dress because it looks nice.
Where do you work?
I work in an office.
Which office do you work in?
I work in the sales office.
What do you do at work?
I answer phone calls.
When do you start work?
I start work at 9:30 a.m.
Why do you answer phone calls?
I answer calls to help customers.
Where do you sit at work?
I sit at a desk.
Which chair do you use?
I use a black chair.
What do you eat for lunch?
I eat rice and chicken.
When do you have lunch?
I have lunch at 1 p.m.
Why do you eat chicken?
I eat chicken because I like it.
Where do you eat lunch?
I ate lunch in the break room.
Which drink do you have with lunch?
I have water with lunch.
What do you do after lunch?
I go back to work.
When do you finish work?
I finish work at 5 p.m.
Why do you finish at 5 p.m.?
I finish at 5 p.m. because my shift ends.
Where do you go after work?
I go to the supermarket.
Which things do you buy?
I buy milk and bread.
What do you do at the supermarket?
I buy groceries.
When do you pay for your groceries?
I pay at the cashier.
Why do you buy milk?
I buy milk for breakfast.
Where do you put your groceries?
I put them in a bag.
Which bag do you use?
I use a green bag.
What do you do after shopping?
I go home.
When do you reach home?
I reach home at 6 p.m.
Why do you go home early?
I go home early to cook dinner.
Where do you cook dinner?
I cook dinner in the kitchen.
Which food do you cook?
I cook pasta.
What do you add to your pasta?
I add tomato sauce.
When do you eat dinner?
I eat dinner at 7 p.m.
Why do you eat pasta?
I eat pasta because it is easy to cook.
Where do you eat dinner?
I eat dinner at the table.
Which plate do you use?
I use a white plate.
What do you do after dinner?
I watch TV.
When do you watch TV?
I watch TV at 8 p.m.
Why do you watch TV?
I watch TV to relax.
Where do you sit to watch TV?
I sit on the couch.
Which show do you watch?
I watch a comedy show.
What do you do after watching TV?
I go to bed.
When do you go to bed?
I go to bed at 10 p.m.
Why do you go to bed early?
I go to bed early to rest.
Where do you sleep?
I sleep in my bedroom.
Which blanket do you use?
I use a soft blanket.
What do you do on weekends?
I go to the park.
When do you go to the park?
I go to the park on Saturday.
Why do you go to the park?
I go to the park to walk.
Where is the park?
The park is near my house.
Which path do you walk on?
I walk on the flower path.
What do you see at the park?
I see trees and birds.
When do you leave the park?
I leave the park at 3 p.m.
Why do you like the park?
I like the park because it is quiet.
Where do you sit at the park?
I sit on a bench.
Which bench do you choose?
I choose a wooden bench.
What do you do at the park?
I read a book.
When do you read your book?
I read my book in the afternoon.
Why do you read at the park?
I read at the park because it is peaceful.
Where do you keep your book?
I keep my book in my bag.
Which book do you read?
I read a storybook.
What do you do after reading?
I walk home.
Why do you walk home?
I walk home because it is close.
Where do you put your bag?
I put my bag on the table.
Which table do you use?
I use the dining table.
What do you do on Sunday?
I visit my friend.
When do you visit your friend?
I visit my friend at 11 a.m.
Why do you visit your friend?
I visit my friend to talk.
Where does your friend live?
My friend lives in the city.
Which bus do you take?
I take the number 5 bus.
What do you talk about with your friend?
We talk about movies.
When do you leave your friend's house?
I leave at 2 p.m.
Why do you leave early?
I leave early to go shopping.
Where do you go shopping?
I go to the mall.
Which store do you visit?
I visit the clothes store.
What do you buy at the mall?
I buy a new dress.
When do you try on the dress?
I try on the dress in the store.
Why do you buy a dress?
I buy a dress for a party.
Where is the party?
The party is at my friend's house.
Which color dress do you buy?
I buy a red dress.
Why do you go home?
I go home to rest.
Where do you rest?
I rest on my bed.
Which pillow do you use?
I use a soft pillow.
What do you do in the evening?
I cook dinner.
When do you start cooking?
I start cooking at 6 p.m.
Why do you cook dinner?
I cook dinner because I am hungry.
Where do you keep your food?
I keep my food in the fridge.
Which vegetables do you use?
I use carrots and peas.
What do you make for dinner?
I make soup.
When do you eat your soup?
I eat my soup at 7 p.m.
Why do you like soup?
I like soup because it is warm.
Where do you eat your soup?
I ate my soup in the kitchen.
Which bowl do you use?
I use a big bowl.
What do you do after eating?
I wash the dishes.
When do you wash the dishes?
I wash the dishes at 7:30 p.m.
Why do you wash the dishes?
I wash the dishes to keep the kitchen clean.
Where do you put the dishes?
I put the dishes in the cabinet.
Which cloth do you use to dry them?
I use a white cloth.
What do you do after washing dishes?
I watch a movie.
When do you start the movie?
I start the movie at 8 p.m.
Why do you watch a movie?
I watch a movie to have fun.
Where do you watch the movie?
I watch the movie in the living room.
Which movie do you watch?
I watch a funny movie.
What do you eat while watching?
I eat popcorn.
When do you make popcorn?
I make popcorn before the movie.
Why do you eat popcorn?
I eat popcorn because it tastes good.
Where do you keep the popcorn?
I keep the popcorn in a bowl.
What do you do after the movie?
I go to bed.
Where do you keep your phone at night?
I keep my phone on the table.
What do you do on Monday?
I go to work.
Why do you go to work early?
I go to work early to be on time.
Where do you catch the bus?
I catch the bus at the bus stop.
What do you do on the bus?
I listen to music.
When do you reach your office?
I reach my office at 9 a.m.
Why do you listen to music?
I listen to music to relax.
Where do you keep your headphones?
I keep my headphones in my bag.
Which music do you listen to?
I listen to pop music.
What do you do at the office?
I write emails.
When do you send emails?
I send emails in the morning.
Why do you write emails?
I write emails to talk to clients.
Where do you sit at the office?
I sit at my desk.
Which computer do you use?
I use a small computer.
What do you do at lunch?
I eat with my coworkers.
When do you eat lunch?
I eat lunch at 12 p.m.
Why do you eat with coworkers?
I eat with coworkers to be friendly.
Which food do you choose?
I choose a salad.
Which exercise do you do at the gym?
I do yoga.
What do you wear to the gym?
I wear a t-shirt and pants.
When do you start yoga?
I start yoga at 6 p.m.
Why do you do yoga?
I do yoga to stay healthy.
Where do you keep your gym bag?
I keep my gym bag in the locker.
Which locker do you use?
I use the blue locker.
What do you do after yoga?
I take a shower.
When do you take a shower?
I take a shower at 7 p.m.
Why do you take a shower?
I take a shower to feel clean.
Where do you take a shower?
I take a shower at the gym.
Which towel do you use?
I use a white towel.
What do you do after the gym?
I go home.
Why do you go home late?
I go home late because of the gym.
Where do you put your gym clothes?
I put my gym clothes in the laundry.
Which laundry basket do you use?
I use a big laundry basket.
What do you do at home?
I eat dinner.
Why do you eat late?
I eat late because I go to the gym.
Which chair do you sit on?
I sit on a wooden chair.
What do you eat for dinner?
I eat fish and rice.
When do you cook the fish?
I cook the fish at 8 p.m.
Why do you eat fish?
I eat fish because it is healthy.
Where do you buy the fish?
I buy the fish at the market.
Which market do you go to?
I go to the fish market.
When do you start reading?
I start reading at 9 p.m.
Why do you read a book?
I read a book to relax.
Where do you read your book?
I read my book in my bedroom.
When do you go to sleep?
I go to sleep at 10 p.m.
Why do you sleep early?
I sleep early to feel good tomorrow.
Which shelf do you use?
I use the top shelf.
When do you visit your parents?
I visit my parents on Sunday.
Why do you visit your parents?
I visit my parents to spend time with them.
Where do your parents live?
My parents live in a village.
Which car do you drive?
I drive a small car.
What do you do at your parents' house?
I help my mom cook.
When do you help your mom?
I help my mom in the morning.
Why do you help your mom?
I help my mom because I love her.
Where do you cook with your mom?
We cook in the kitchen.
What do you do after cooking?
We eat together.
When do you eat with your parents?
We eat at 1 p.m.
Why do you eat together?
We eat together to talk and laugh.
Where do you eat at their house?
We eat in the dining room.
When do you talk to your dad?
I talk to my dad after lunch.
Why do you talk to your dad?
I talk to my dad to hear his stories.
Where do you sit with your dad?
We sit in the garden.
What do you do in the garden?
We look at the flowers.
When do you leave your parents' house?
I leave at 4 p.m.
Where do you drive to?
I drive to my house.
Which road do you take?
I take the main road.
What do you do when you get home?
I take a shower.
Which soap do you use?
I use lavender soap.
What do you do after your shower?
I watch TV.
Where do you keep the remote?
I keep the remote on the table.
Which channel do you watch?
I watch the news channel.
When do you eat your snack?
I eat my snack at 7 p.m.
Why do you eat a snack?
I eat a snack because I am hungry.
Where do you eat your snack?
I eat my snack in the kitchen.
Which snack do you eat?
I eat an apple.
What do you do after your snack?
I call my friend.
When do you call your friend?
I call my friend at 7:30 p.m.
Why do you call your friend?
I call my friend to talk.
Where is your friend?
My friend is at her house.
Which phone do you use?
I use my mobile phone.
When do you finish talking?
I finish talking at 8 p.m.
Why do you stop talking?
I stop talking because I need to rest.
Where do you keep your phone?
I keep my phone on the table.
What do you do before bed?
I brush my teeth.
When do you brush your teeth?
I brush my teeth at 9 p.m.
Why do you brush your teeth?
I brush my teeth to keep them clean.
Where do you brush your teeth?
I brush my teeth in the bathroom.
Which toothbrush do you use?
I use a blue toothbrush.
What do you do after brushing?
I go to bed.
When do you turn off the lights?
I turn off the lights at 9:30 p.m.
Why do you turn off the lights?
I turn off the lights to sleep.